Hello, my name is Kelvin Haizel. I'm an artist from Ghana and a PhD student at the KNUST Department of Painting and Sculpture. I work in photography, video, installations. My interest is in the image and how they manifest in multi-sites and multi-forms.
Yeah, welcome to our MARKK in Motion video podcast. Kelvin is our artist in residence here at MARKK, and we're really happy that you're working with us for an exhibition which will be on display in the context of the Triennial for Photography next May. And one thing which was really important in the last weeks also was that your art and your production is always research-based. And we thought maybe we'd start the video podcast with the question that you can elaborate a little bit on what does it actually mean to have a research-based art process. And
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my work and my practice with you all. My practice is mainly based on investigations into the image and how the multifacetedness of the image is something that I am interested in. How the image, how to navigate the concept of the image through the sonic, the haptic, the visual, all coming into conversation with what you would consider as the expanded field of the image in experiential terms. And so my research is largely based on that, and it's through the practical application and investigations into the image in these directions. So I would like to think of the image in more broader perspective or in broader terms as something that is not only reliant on the ocular, but something that is multi-sited in terms of our experience. So Braille is something that is recurrent in the images that I produce. There is also the idea of the moving and still image, inhabiting the same space. And yes, a lot of ways to complicate what is otherwise the received notion of the image, which is reliant on, the visual alone, or privileges the visual as the site of the image or accessing the image. So basically, this is how my practice, tries to expand on the notions of the image.
And in kind of the case here at the residency at MARKK, there's one photo album in the center, right? It's a photo album from 1868, linked to a Hamburg merchant family. The whole context of this kind of album, of the photography of the 1860s, how you kind of work with these kind of historical context, this, the context basically of the album.
Yeah, I think to begin with, having an album which is almost blank in sense of an archive that doesn't have any inscriptions, any annotations, anything that would lead you to further identify what the context of the photographs in the album are or where they come from. My starting point was to begin to understand where they were made, how it was constructed, the kind of lens through which this construction was made, and the type of gaze that is presented in this particular album or in this series of constructions of a space. And so that's on the one side. The other dimension I wanted to also expand on and investigate thoroughly was the materiality of the album, of the photographs, in the sense that these photographs were produced, early to mid 1860s, and this was still the earliest forms of photography. These are albumen prints, and albumen prints have are susceptible to some type of environmental, bacterial conditions, fungal conditions, depending on climate, depending on humidity in the air and all that. And so I wanted to understand how these blemishes, these ruptures, these stains on the photographs have, happened over the years. This is more than 100 and maybe 150 years ago. So I'm trying to understand the albumin, the chemical processes and all of that in relation to the ruptures, the stains, the accidents that has happened to the images over time. To further understand it in political terms, I was also thinking about the idea of the album as a gift, which had gone from a family member of the Dunka, family in Southeast Asia, specifically Singapore, all through to Hamburg, and to look at the parallels between the gifts, on the path that leads to imperialism. The same path on which conquest is made is the same path on which the album as a gift, travels. So I'm looking at the trade routes between Hamburg and the Southeast Indies, Southeast Asia, before 1869, which is the creation of the Suez Canal, which changes the route through which this would have gone, because the album came in 1868, or it was created around 1868. So therefore, the route with which it would have traveled is not the same route that it takes now, and all that. So I'm trying to conflict and trying to maybe tease out some elements of the idea of a gift in relation to the political mapping of space.
I mean, one question would also be the general topic of the Triennial for Photography is currency. And all the exhibitions here in Hamburg in any way rely or relate in a way to this topic of currency. How your kind of approach so far in a way kind of brings in this idea of currency.
I think of course we are discussing the idea of currency or the theme of the exhibition in a more humanist terms, right? And the way that it creates agency for the human. But then my approach in dealing with this same topic, with giving agency to bacteria that are also in a way fighting, a construction of a people or a framing of a people, is also another type of currency that is coming into the conversation. And so I think if we can open up beyond the human into understanding the space of accidents and the space of or maybe agency of bacteria, agency of the medium, the material, as a form of currency, then it can be a refreshing take on the same subject. So this is what I think I would contribute to.
Super interesting. I mean, just kind of came in my mind this whole actor network theory, kind of bringing kind of human relations and, I mean, bacteria, but also, I mean, we are in time of a pandemic, right? So all these questions. There are definitely associations in this regard.
Yeah. I think the interesting aspect is that, of course, actor network theory is also in close relations with what you consider the speculative realist, domain within that. And to think about that, I think about maybe Graham Hammond's concepts of the OOO, or how to think about a broader conception of the objects. And right from the start, I've been interested in objectness of the image. And so to think about the way that it cannot be exhausted, or it has the possibility to think about it in that sense, the object has a possibility to, there's always an excess, there's always a surplus that cannot be accounted for. And so it is neither, you can't reduce it to a specific, construction alone. But that's why, the angle through which the bacteria comes in as a part of the image is important. If I am looking at the album now, maybe in the construction or framing of the subject, the bacteria or the fungal infestation and all that wasn't a part of the image. But if I scan the whole album now into a digital file, or if I take a photograph or rephotograph the entire picture, that becomes a stain in the picture, and I have to, or it can't be ignored. And so there is a certain element that cannot be reduced. It's a part of the image now, so you can't reduce the image only to the framing of the subject at the time, of these expeditions. So that's how I'm interested in the objectness of the image.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. There are some other questions I would love to expand a little bit on. One question is basically working in collectives, or also between collectives and individual approaches. Could you maybe say a little bit about your artistic practice in this regard? So you're not only kind of working in collectives, but you're also doing a PhD. So you're basically also always playing between kind of formats of the way how you work, right?
Yeah, I think to begin with, the notion of the collective, or being a part of a collective, is as much a part of my practice as my independent inquiry. The country, or Ghana specifically, has a particular history, which in educational, more like an educational history that at a point had to suffer crisis. And as a result, there was a deficit in the type of education that produces the kind of artists that, that could contribute politically, intellectually, to the larger conversation on contemporary discourse. But with the advent of, or the emergence of caricature seduce teaching, there is an open, the space of discourse has opened to accommodate a lot of us. And that has transformed into what we call the Black Star Lines Collective. Now, I belong to that collective, and I also have a 5-member collective that I belong to, which is Exit Frame Collective. Exit Frame emerged out of conversations around friends, and we were, participating in Ghana in various forms, in curating art conversations and all that. And in 2012, we decided to formalize it as a collective. And we are interested in pedagogy. So it's almost tied in with the Black Star Lines ethos of revising the histories to accommodate, or to allow for thinking beyond maybe a certain Eurocentric or a certain European dead curriculum that was in the picture at the time, or that was churning out some artists. It did its best, but it wasn't enough. And so the revision is helping to produce a different kind of artist from the Kumasi school. And this is what Exit Frame also has latched onto. So we have what we call the Crit Lab, which is a peer-to-peer, pedagogic, lab session. We invite participants. Actually, the last edition just ended 2 days ago. And so it's more in filling in the gaps that is created by, a certain loss, of educational, or a certain gap in the educational
infrastructure.
Yeah, structure.
Okay. The last question would be, the art residency, also here, the Zwischenraum, different other exhibitions we are planning, they are all kind of in the context of the repositioning process of the museum. So the museum is in the process of repositioning for some years now. And one idea is also, of course, to bring contemporary artists in museum with so-called ethnographic collections. And in this process, I would be really interested what kind of pitfalls you maybe see, or what general take you see in a museum like our museum, with kind of a lot of colonial context of collections, or with a lot of collections with colonial contexts. And the whole architecture, everything here is kind of loaded, right? It's a loaded space. And yeah, could you maybe say something, what you think is kind of the role maybe also of contemporary art in this process, but also the pitfalls? Yeah.
On the one hand, you will think about how maybe if you take Hans Belton's idea of the world art into global art, you will think that yes, there's a transition, there's a general transition, and your museum lacks risks, obscurity, or risks remaining in the past if it doesn't accommodate or try to integrate contemporary discourse. And so on that front, it is important that the museum does that. On the other hand, we have to think about the conversations between what is the emergence of the contemporary itself and its associations with the global networks. And that would include, it's not only cultural, but economic, political, or whatnot. And so it's important that we engage discourse, not only rested in the past, but what affects the current conditions that we are living in, or that produces the kind of conditions that we are in. This museum and its collection and everything is part of an imperialist, gaze, an imperialist worldview that sort of mapped out different spaces based on certain colonial enterprise, right?
Fantasies,
and fantasies and fictions that evolves from that. But we have to think about what same relations it can produce in the contemporary, how it participates in post-COVID era is another thing. How are we thinking about it? If there's another world that has emerged based on the crisis that the world has gone through, how does it position itself? And so it is important that, for instance, we were talking about this yesterday, and then you mentioned how ideas lying around at the moments of crisis, you can pick is what gets picked up. So how do we litter around by bringing in contemporary perspective so that we can at least maybe begin to judge or begin to pick these ideas up and then, envision something that could potentially 100 years from now be relevant in a different economic system.
I mean, yesterday the conversation was also about that this quote actually is is in the center of neoliberal ideology, right? So, but yeah, it's I think it's very interesting, and also to the expression of litter around. I like a lot. Kelvin, thank you so much for joining our video podcast, our Mark in Motion podcast. And next year in May, the exhibition Archive of Experience, which is curated by Masa Kasungu and me, and will feature very centrally your work, will be open in the context of the Triennial for Photography. We're really looking forward to this month and to have you here in the next weeks and work with you. And thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And a big thanks also, of course, to the German Federal Cultural Foundation for making the podcast possible. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.